think it's pretty likely that the cabinet will turn against Starmer tomorrow. And if I was a betting man, which I am, I would be seeing Keir Starmer step out onto the streets of Downing Street tomorrow to set out a timetable for his departure. Now, depending on how that goes, we could get a situation where Andy Burnham enters the race. I think Burnham is the right choice, both for the party and the country, because in order to win the next election, the Labour Party need to situate themselves very clearly on the left of politics. I don't think that has been clear under Keir Starmer, with some of the moves that he's made in office to attack the disabled and the elderly. These moves didn't send out a clear enough message that Labour was on the left, that Labour was on people's side. So I think whoever leads the party next, and Burnham would be a good choice, needs to situate themselves on the left. They need to take some pretty bold measures, measures that materially improve people's lives, measures that might be a bit divisive, that might hurt some people and help others. You know, that's kind of the business of government, and the point of a Labour government is to be on the side of the vast majority of people, the ordinary people of this country, the working class. So it's got to be a leader that understands that politics is about making decisions and not the kind of difficult decisions we've seen under Keir Starmer, right? The difficult decisions he made always targeted the poor and the vulnerable. And when he ended up inevitably switching course in these U-turns, of which there were many, it always felt like he was being dragged kicking and screaming towards doing the right thing. It's a bit like his announcement this morning about steel nationalisation. Nobody believes in his heart and in his soul that he believes in this stuff, whereas they would believe it about Burnham, they'd believe it about Miliband, they'd believe it about Rayner. They wouldn't believe it about Wes Streeting, or maybe they would. He's a reasonably good salesperson. But Wes is a man who is driven, I'm afraid to say, by his own ambition. I didn't know Wes well as a student, but I knew of him. He was president of the National Union of Students. I remember him coming down to Durham University once and giving a speech. And what you could tell about Wes even then, and I think he's really struggled to hide it ever since, is that he is somebody with massive ambition. He's always wanted to lead the Labour Party. He's always wanted to be Prime Minister. And I really worry about such people. I think it's important that those people who take on power, and this is what I admired about Jeremy Corbyn, are people that get thrust into the spotlight, that don't want to seek power for its own sake, that are reluctant leaders. Starmer wasn't like that. Streeting's not like that either. And maybe there isn't somebody like that, you know, that's available, because the whole way our politics works is that political parties, as they exist currently, are vehicles for people's careers. And even as we speak, with members of parliament turning against the Prime Minister, many of them are either sticking with him or turning against him, not because they believe as a matter of principle that the Labour Party needs to shift direction to be on the side of ordinary people, but because they're worried about their seats at the next election, they're worried about their careers. They stuck with Starmer because he was good for their careers, and now as power inevitably dissipates from him because of poor poll ratings, because of bad election results, off they trot. Not because they care about the country, not because they care about the party, but because fundamentally they care about themselves. And I'm sorry to be so cynical, but when I did used to teach politics, I don't anymore. One of the first things I used to tell my students is, look, if you're going to understand the motivations of politicians, you do need to think a little bit cynically. You do need to understand that they are people who have self-interested reasons to do things. And that's the opposite of what we need as a country, but that is what we have. So look, I don't support Wes Streeting, partly because I view him as being a very self-interested politician, and partly because the antidote he offers is not the antidote that the country needs. He's not the solution to the problem that is Keir Starmer. The problem that Starmer had was not just one of communication. And that's really the analysis that somebody like Streeting would offer, right? That the solution is to yes, be a bit faster, maybe a little bit bolder in what Labour is offering, but fundamentally somebody like Streeting thinks that he is a better communicator, that he tells a better story. And I think he does, but I also think that there is a very thin veneer and that people will see through Wes very quickly. And I really do think that actually after maybe a bit of a bounce when he becomes leader, his star will fade very, very quickly and well before the next election, because there are deeper currents in our politics that are causing the changes that we see. There's a genuine discontentment with a system that has persisted really since the Labour Party replaced the Liberals in the 1920s, and even before that, if you look at the two-party system that existed prior to the Labour Party existing, there's a kind of duopoly of power, that power rotates between these two major parties, and the political debate that we want to have in the country, that we want to, if we're on the left or if we're on the right, that we want to include bold ideas, radical ideas, gets contained within these two monolithic parties who vie for the centre ground to win office, and so there's a feeling that nothing really changes. Whilst at the same time, our electoral system prevents, because it's designed to prevent, any party that challenges that consensus of the so-called uniparty from breaking through. So we're kind of trapped in this system that doesn't allow the kind of change that we need. And that wasn't always the case. We had the big landslide elections of Attlee and Thatcher that produced transformative governments. And I believe that when a political party wins a landslide, it should at least try and deliver the scale of change that landslide is supposed to represent. Now, the truth is, it didn't really represent that great swell of support at the last election. It was a very unusual landslide. It was a loveless landslide. But still, the landslide is there. And Starmer didn't use it. He was a weather-vane politician. He didn't have a clear sense of direction. He didn't have a clear philosophy. He was a rudderless, petty bureaucrat with very authoritarian instincts, who kicked out at the poorest and the most vulnerable and didn't provide the country with the direction that it needed, and he must go. So I think that the next leader has got to be rooted on the left, and given that Burnham is a difficult proposition, right? First of all, he'd need to get past the NEC. Well, it looks like they might be shifting towards him, not because of anything other than their political interest as well, right? Because they won't want to get in the way of a future Prime Minister, potentially, right? And Starmer's power is waning. So the loyalists on the NEC are starting to see which way the wind is blowing, and they're shifting direction. So maybe they won't stand in the way of Andy Burnham getting a seat. But then he's got to win a by-election. And he's got to trigger a contest in Manchester, a contest that might happen, fairly soon after he perhaps becomes Prime Minister. Or maybe they're still in the middle of a leadership contest, and the Manchester mayoral election is going on at the same time. It's not an uncomplicated route to get Burnham in. He is the right choice. But look, the NEC messed up. They should have let him stand in Gorton and Denton. They should have given him that opportunity, and then we wouldn't be dealing in hypotheticals. So I guess what I think is it's probably got to be somebody like Ed Miliband, somebody like Angela Rayner. Obviously, my preference would be for somebody more left-wing. I'd love John McDonnell to stand, or Clive Lewis, right? But the truth is that the PLP, the Labour MPs, are very right-wing. And so it's not a PLP that's going to elect somebody on the left. They're going to want to elect somebody that shares their values, and there's probably enough support with the left plus the soft left in the Labour Party to elect somebody like Angela Rayner or Ed Miliband to go forward to the membership, but there isn't going to be support for somebody that's truly left-wing. So what we're talking about here is a compromise candidate, and what they need to do is, I think, quite straightforward in many ways. They need to stake out a clear vision that is rooted in Labour values, and they need to be able to tell a story and take on some of the arguments that the right are making, rather than doing what Starmer did, which is to lean into them and leave them unchallenged. The job of a Labour leader is to provide that direction, to provide the argument, to not allow the country to drift further and further to the right. And I guess that's why I prefer Miliband over Rayner. There are difficulties with him being Prime Minister. The country had an opportunity to elect Miliband in 2015 and they didn't. But I think we've got to remember that the Miliband of 2015 was before Corbyn, and Miliband felt constrained to offer something more bold than he did. We ended up with this big slab of concrete with these messages on it. It became known as the Ed Stone, and they weren't very radical. Let's just put it that way. Not very ambitious, not very clear. So look, he has lost an election. He didn't win in 2015, but the Ed Miliband we would get following a leadership election, the Ed Miliband we'd get as Prime Minister in this context, wouldn't be the same Ed Miliband from 2015. I do think he's a better politician now. He's not perfect, but if your interest is in trying to move the country in a better direction, trying to prevent a reform government, which everybody's got an interest in, then I think Ed Miliband is the right choice for this moment. Let's see what happens. As I say, I do expect the Prime Minister to resign tomorrow. You'll know watching this, perhaps, if I'm right. Let's see what happens. But those are my thoughts at the present moment. Obviously, all of this could be overtaken by events, but I thought I would just record a quick video setting out what I think right now as things stand on Monday evening. For now, goodbye. Best wishes.